Focal just came to market with two new loudspeaker lines, the Vestia and Thiva. Now, we've got our hands on the Vestia number 1, which is not a replacement for the hugely popular CHORA 806, but rather a speaker that is poised to do battle with Focal's more expensive Aria line. We typically like Focal speakers, but we will be the first to tell you that there is a difference between the series. So, let's see where the Vestia falls. The Vestia number 1 is a two-way bookshelf loudspeaker that features a 6.5-inch slate fiber mid-bass driver mated to a 1-inch inverted dome tweeter, both of which, like the rest of the speaker itself, are manufactured by Focal in France. The two drivers and front-ported cabinet combine for a reported frequency response of 56 Hz to 30 kHz, which isn't too far off from the reported response of the costlier Aria 906. The number 1 has a sensitivity of 89.5 dB with an impedance of 8 ohms, though Focal does state that the speaker can dip as low as 4.5. This means that for the most part, the Vestia is pretty amplifier friendly, pairing well with both affordable and higher end hi-fi and home theater equipment. We tested the Vestia on a variety of amps and receivers. The Audiolab 7000A, Cambridge Audio AXA25, the new Pioneer 805, and the wildly expensive Marantz Amp 10 and AV10 home theater separates. Whether we were using the $300 Cambridge amp or the $14,000 pair of Marantz separates, all power the Vestia speakers to their fullest potential and volume in our almost 500 square foot space with zero strain. So at least from that standpoint, this is a speaker that you can invest in now and grow with over time. Now, my favorite pairing was the Marantz, but who are we kidding? At 14 grand, it better have been my favorite. But so long as your amp or receiver can handle a 4 ohm load, you're going to be just fine. The Vestia is available in a high gloss black, dark wood, and light wood finish. The wood side panels have a matching or complementary leather-like finish on the front and back, which is a nice touch, though I kind of wish that the wood side panels were better aligned with the MDF cabinet. The speaker comes with matching magnetic grills, which helps to keep kiddos or pets from touching the drivers. I happen to prefer them with their grills off, but hey, that's just me. Now, this is a speaker that does not appear to change that much with respect to its frequency response, whether you place it close to a wall or pull it out into your room, which can be a really good thing if you're tight on space. That said, soundstage depth does appear to suffer a little with the speakers placed closer to a wall, but their overall tone remains pretty consistent with little bass loading or change due to the speaker's front-facing port. I ended up placing them about 24 inches out, off our front wall and about 9 feet apart with just a hint of toe-in. Doing this elevated the treble just enough so that it fell in closer alignment with the speaker's mid-range without it becoming too prominent. Now, pointing the speakers directly at my listening position definitely made the treble stand out, but it's not required to lock the speaker's center image in, granite. So if you like a hotter or more treble-forward sound, please experiment with the speaker's toe-in until you arrive at a sound that works for you. But with all that out of the way, I did a couple of quick sweeps, 20 to 20. Results were a little bit lumpy. The Vestia still maintains a mostly linear response with some initial roll-off in the treble starting at around 1 kHz. Now, this roll-off can be more dramatic or non-existent depending on how much toe-in you use, as I noted in the setup chapter of this review. Regardless, whether EQing these speakers manually or relying on software like Dirac, the Vestia responds very well to correction, after which they are pretty damn respectable in room. If you're like me and mistakenly thought that the Vestia line was the CHORA replacement, know that it's not. That's coming with the Thiva line, which we don't have yet. When we first fired this up, I turned to Christy and I said, these sound like Arias. And for some of you, this will be a welcome note. In our room, the number 1 sound is less lively and more neutral leaning compared to the more exciting and lively CHORAs, at least as far as I can remember. Not saying this is a bad thing, it just required an adjustment on my part because I went in expecting one type of sound only to get another. So, allow me to break it down. These are not bass-heavy speakers. They roll off somewhat early and do not possess a great deal of boost in the lower frequencies they do have, so don't expect them to sound bigger or richer than what their specs state. They have good bass extension, but there are bookshelf speakers in this class that will give you a greater sense of weight, like the REVEL M16. The Vestia extends low enough that crossing it over with a sub will easily help to fill in its bottom octaves. We used our KLIPSCH RP1000 subwoofer, which was a good match sonically, but maybe not the best match visually. So if you prefer more finesse and detail throughout the bass rather than boom on their own, the Vestia is a speaker that's still worth considering. When it comes to the number ones mid-range and treble, the Vestia is very intelligible without too much added mid-range or treble boost. Mid-range leading instruments and vocals had terrific detail and inflection at all volumes. At loud volumes, the Vestia's mid-range doesn't become shouty or overly chesty, which is a very good thing. Listening to some of my favorite tracks, Moby's Ever-Loving, Perfect Circles, The Noose, or just anything off of Alanis Morissette's Unplugged, the mid-range presence and precision proved to be one of my favorite aspects of the speaker's sound. Now, adding a sub brought out positive changes to the mid-range overall sense of body, which gave performers and instruments a little bit more dimension. So in our room, I actually preferred the sound of these with a subwoofer, and I would actually recommend adding a sub. Not only does it give the speaker a more full range sound, but it does add some needed weight to the mid-range as well. As for the treble, this speaker is a little bit placement dependent because pointed directly at your listening position, this speaker picks up a bit of added sparkle and brightness, but it never becomes brittle or fatiguing, which in my opinion is what you want. With the speakers only slightly towed in, I found the treble response to be mildly less airy and extended and maybe just a tad on the drier side. Now this tracks with my experience with Focal's costlier Aria line, but it differs from the less expensive CHORA. The Vestia appears to want to give listeners a taste of a more refined top end rather than one that wows you out of the box with a bit more tipped up response like you get with the CHORA. Now which is best is going to be up to you. Nevertheless, the Vestia's top end is more refined than what you may be used to or expecting from Focal's more affordable speakers. No surprise here, these image like champions. Focal remains one of the most consistent brands with respect to SOUNDSTAGE, and the new Vestia number 1 is no exception. Depth to width, the Vestia didn't favor one over the other, and detail between the speakers was impressive. The presence of a sub helped to better ground instruments and performers in three-dimensional space, and it also lent some much-needed heft to dynamic swings, because on their own, the Focals have great reflexes, but they absolutely lack the weight for instruments like kick drums, and they require a subwoofer to land those instruments with any sort of realistic authority. The most comparable speaker that comes to mind has to be SONUS FABER's Lumina 2. At $1,200 a pair, the Luminas are right in Focal's wheelhouse. The 2s have a slightly smaller woofer, though its frequency response is roughly equal to that of the Focal. They are also a little harder to drive, making the Luminas a bit more demanding for your amp. That said, the 2s have a rise in the treble that, while not fatiguing, definitely allows for greater detail to shine through at lower volumes. All that said, while not as immediately captivating, the Focals are the better, more well-balanced speaker top to bottom, and when playing at loud levels, I'm talking volumes higher than say 90 dB, the larger cabinet of the Focal pays off as it handles the SPL just better than the SONUS FABER. While I prefer the Lumina's style, the Focal appears to be the better speaker overall in this comparison. Earlier, I mentioned the M16s from REVEL. Now, admittedly, these are getting very long in the tooth. Nevertheless, they are still comparable. The M16s are more rolled off and definitely have greater sense of bass weight compared to the Focals, though they both benefit from a sub. I love the M16s, and seeing as how you can get a pair for roughly half of what the Focals command, I would urge some of you to check them out if you're looking for a more affordable alternative, while supplies last. Now, at half the cost of the Vestia, the R200s from POLK are a worthy competitor, though they're not going to have the same top-end detail or transparency of SOUNDSTAGE, but like the REVELs, the R200s have a fuller bottom end that can make them seem more full range, especially in smaller rooms. Definitely worth a look, and I still very much recommend the original R200s over the R200AE, which are more comparable in price to the Focals here. So wrapping things up, I think the Vestia line is an interesting one. For me, it's beyond reminiscent of Focal's own Aria line, only it costs less, which is a move you don't see a lot of manufacturers making nowadays. I'm not saying the Vestia is better than the Aria 906, but going off of my past experience with the Aria Towers, I think I'd save my money and get something from the new Vestia line and just add a sub. The new number 1 is a solid speaker, one that definitely benefits from the presence of a subwoofer, which may add to the overall cost, but if traits like a wide open, detailed soundstage, good intelligibility without too much added brightness, and some placement flexibility are high priorities, I would encourage you to put the Vestia number 1 on your audition list. So that's it for me and the new Focal speaker, but before we get out of here, what'd you think?
I like them. Mm-hmm. I do. They're not my favorite.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't love the Aria line.
Right.
So the fact that these are similar, somewhat close in sound.
Yeah, they're very similar.
They're just not
They're
my
not for
preference.
you? Okay.
Especially when it comes to Focal.
Mm-hmm.
I personally prefer the sound of the CHORA line.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go with something like that. I don't even know if you can still get the CHORAs. If you can, they're probably practically free.
Last I checked, they are on deep discount.
Yeah. Or I'm very excited to see how the Theva,
yeah, the names were a little weird.
I don't know. I'm tired, guys. Forgive me. I'm excited to get that other speaker to see what it does.
I am too. I kind of want to compare, yeah.
But I kind of want to go into the comparisons just a little bit more deeply.
Okay.
Speaking of the CHORA, I feel like people are going to want you to do a bit of a deeper dive into how the number ones from Vestia compare specifically to the CHORA 806. So can you just speak a little bit more
how
about
this new one would compare
directly
to CHORA?
The 806?
Well, obviously there's some physical finishes and those kinds of changes, but all of that aside, sonically, I think the CHORAs are likely for most people and in most rooms. I think the CHORAs are likely going to sound a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more exciting. They're going to have a little bit of that V curve to them because there's definitely a little push in the bass that gets them pumping, get that blood flowing, and there is that little bit of rise in the treble that definitely brings out detail at all volumes. Now, I think that if you really hammer on the CHORAs, you can get them to be bright or maybe fatiguing for some people. But for the most part, if you listen, say, 60 to 80 dB tops, you're probably going to be okay. Whereas these new ones, you can hammer on them all the way up to 100 dB, and I don't find that tweeter to be shouty or fatiguing. But it may not be as exciting for some people. I know it probably wasn't as exciting for you. I happen to like it. But understand that I experimented with toe-in probably more with this particular speaker than just about anything, just to find the right balance. Directly at me, the tweeter was still fine, not my favorite. Straight ahead, it was almost non-existent. So don't be afraid to have to play a little bit with this one. But that's what I think would be the biggest difference, is apart from the physical.
I don't really love this particular finish that we have.
Yeah.
I guess I need a little bit more color. If it's a little bit like, whitewash.
Yeah, it's
shabby
farmhousey.
Chic,
it's farmhousey.
Which just isn't my thing.
Can I just point one thing out? And I didn't really point this out in the review because everyone's mileage is going to vary. But if it were me and I were buying these speakers, I actually wouldn't get the white finish. And not for farmhouse aesthetics aside, the white leather shows dirt and oil, and it is incredibly hard to get off. I made the mistake of doing picking up a FedEx box. We got a delivery, and I forgot to wash my hands. And so I had a little bit of box dirt on my finger, and I went and I was still playing with the toe-in on these speakers, and I left a fingerprint on the leather, and it's still kind of there. I wiped it down immediately, did my best, but there's still now a discoloration on top of the speaker. So sorry, Focal. So I just want to point that out. The other finishes have the leatherette, but it's black or it's darker. And so I would probably say that's going to be a safer bet unless you are just Mr. Clean,
Moving on
to
KLIPSCH.
KLIPSCH.
You did not bring up the 600M Mark IIs, which I am a little surprised you didn't talk about that. I personally prefer that speaker. So weird. That speaker has not gotten a ton of attention or positive attention. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more.
I think I agree. I still am going to have to harp on KLIPSCH a little bit. It's time. It's time to upgrade the finishes. It's time to take the Reference Premier line into that next tier of speaker. All that said, I too prefer the sound of the 600M Mark IIs to these. Kind of like the 600Ms or the Focals. These are both very friendly to smaller spaces. They don't really change their response all that much close to a wall or pulled out. The 2s definitely are milder than the originals, which may have played a role in why maybe people aren't just as excited about them, is because they're actually better.
Yeah, I definitely prefer the Model 2 versus the original, which I didn't like those.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, the originals were fine, but I think the V2s are really exceptional. I spaced. I left those off. I think they're very comparable, both in size and performance. You're obviously paying less for 600M Mark IIs. You're not getting esoteric finishes or even, crazy nice finishes. I mean, the best finish, in my opinion, is black, and it's 50% of them. But all that said, yeah, you're getting a very comparable speaker, one that I have no issues recommending.
Okay, last one.
Okay.
The ARENDAL 1961 bookshelves.
Ooh.
Again, I think I prefer the 1961s.
Well, here's the thing.
I definitely like the look of them better.
Yeah, they're a smaller speaker. They are a smaller speaker. They are sealed, and kind of like the Focals here, they benefit and, i.e., need a subwoofer. I visually, ARENDAL's got it going on. Let's just call it what it is. Like, they make a pretty speaker. That is design forward, balling on a budget, if you're asking me. Again, they work in small spaces. They're great for home theater. They sound pretty musical, more linear without correction. I think if you're running room correction on the Focals or any speaker, really, you're going to get to a positive place. You know what I mean? It's just how much do you have to apply? And in my experience, the ARENDALs don't require as much. And so if you're a person that's very anti-EQ, like, ooh, I don't like it, it's all natural all the time, then you should probably go with the ARENDALs, because they do measure, at least in our room, they do measure more linear.
Unless you just like the Focal sound.
Unless you just like the Focal sound. Now, they do not play as deep as the new Focals, which is kind of amazing. Like, you need to cross the ARENDALs over with a sub a little bit higher. So you will be relying on your sub for even more of that mid-bass weight than, say, the Focals, which may or may not be problematic for some of you. But all things considered, another comparable speaker that is worth looking into. I mean, the Focals really, I applaud Focal for coming to market with what is essentially a cheaper Aria line, because I'm not going to say that they sound just like Aria, but there's enough Aria here that, like I say in the review, like, just spend less money and get this new line. But it ends up being a great option in a sea of options. And the price bracket that this line falls into really is going to be cross-shop with stuff that's half as much and stuff that's just maybe a little bit over. And so there's just a lot of variety kind of at that $1,000, $1,500 price point. So I don't fault anyone for needing to take some time and kind of, do I want this or do I want that or this? Because this market is full. And I fear that the CHORA replacement, the Vestia.
No, Thiva.
See, the CHORA replacement line complicates things even further because they're not radically less expensive than this line. So it's a good move, but it's not, this one's not easy for me in being able to look you guys square in the eye and just being like, this is the one you've been waiting for. It's a solid option, but like I said, it is a solid option in a sea of options. Anyway, that is now our review of the new Focal. what did you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Do all of the stuff. I mean, you should have done it already, but in case you haven't, this is your friendly reminder. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us thank you all so very, very much. Follow me on Instagram, Recovering Audiophile. That's it. That's it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next video. And in the meantime, take care.